I'm happy to welcome on our guest line today the man I'm proud to call my senator, U.S. Senator Tim Scott. Welcome, Senator. How are you?
I'm doing well, Joey. I hope you're doing great. Thanks for the introduction, and thank God that you're filling in for Mike while he's in Japan. There's not a better host to have filling in than you, Joey. Thank
Well,
God for you.
well, thank you, Senator. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and it's a pleasure to sit in for Mike as well. Let's jump right in, Senator. Yesterday, in the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs hearing with the U.S. Department of Treasury, you asked the Biden administration, their deputy secretary, about the effect of lifting sanctions and freeing up a lot of cash to Iran. And I watched the testimony, Senator, and I think I understood him to admit that, yes, this money is risky to release this money, that they most likely will use it for terrorist activity.
He danced for as long as he possibly could, Joey, but the bottom line is a simple one. The answer is emphatically yes. Every single dollar given to Iran will support Iranian proxies in the Middle East to achieve their objective. Their objective, there are two. Number one is to eliminate little Satan, which is Israel. And number two, to get rid of big Satan, which is us. Why in the world would the Biden administration in August release $6 billion, which seemed like a trade for hostages, making it more perilous for every single American outside of our country? That's right. Every single American outside of our country is in more danger because this administration continues to negotiate with folks who take Americans. That is not good for future American lives. And number two, in November, they gave another $10 billion to the Iranian regime. That $16 billion plus relaxing more and more oil sanctions only allows this regime to continue to target American soldiers, to continue to fund the proxies like Hamas, to kill Americans, to kill Jewish people, and to take us hostage. This administration has lost its mind.
Yeah. Senator, you have led the effort to try to hold the Biden administration accountable for this. Recently, you and several of your colleagues in the Senate raised concerns about these latest waivers. You sent a letter to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Tell me, what kind of response do you guys get from the Biden administration when you ask these questions of why they feel like that they need to lift these sanctions?
So, Joey, so often when we write letters to this administration, whether it's Blinken or Yellen, as you just referenced, we get crickets. Literally crickets. We get very little back. If we do, we get a form letter that doesn't even answer the underlying point. Here's my point, though. The American people deserve to know what their government is doing to them and not for them. Every time you find this government complicit with Iran, someone dies, period. Yeah. And that's what we've seen across the world, in the Middle East, and unfortunately, 3 American soldiers who lost their lives at the hands of Iranian proxies. So when that happens, we have a responsibility and a right to hold the feet to the fire of this administration.
Yeah. Senator, let's talk a minute about Israel. You mentioned Israel just a moment ago. And as I understand it, last August, the Biden administration released $6 billion
yes.
to Iran. You, along with some of your Senate colleagues, asked for answers from the administration then. Of course, we saw the attack on October the 7th. We saw the loss of life, the devastation there with Israel. After the attack on Israel, you were the first leader of the Senate Banking Committee to demand accountability there with the Biden administration releasing this $6 billion. Talk with us about what you learned about those funds, and is it safe to assume that if Iran does get access to additional money, that we're going to see more attacks like we saw on October 7th?
Well, Joe, I'll start with the end and work my way back. There's no doubt that every single dollar that Iran gets in their hands, frankly, will lead to more attacks in the Middle East. Whether it's attacks against American soldiers or Israel, we will see more attacks, number one. Number two, here's what we know. The resources that was used to fund the attacks, frankly, some of those resources have come from America. Some would disagree with that point, but let me
Wow.
just make this very clear without any question. Every time you relax sanctions on Iran, they do something that leads to death, despair in the Middle East. And anytime we have our men and women in harm's way, as we do right now, because this administration refuses to shut the lid on American dollars going into the Middle East, into the hands of Iran, it puts more men and women in jeopardy. Number three, it is without question October the 7th. You follow the breadcrumbs. It is clear Hamas soldiers were trained by the IRGC. A report in April of the last year reflected one thing, that 500 or so troops were being trained in Iran by the IRGC. Those troops obviously took that training and helped to slaughter, murder, and work towards a Jewish genocide. There's enough evidence, Joey, enough evidence to hold this administration complicit. That's one of the reasons why I said in October, November, I continue to say today, this administration, President Biden, they have blood on their hands.
Wow. Yeah. On our guest line this morning, Senator Tim Scott. I'm proud to say that he's one of my senators from South Carolina. Senator Mike Gallagher and I traveled to Israel back the first week in March. We did this in partnership with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Senator, I saw firsthand some of the devastation. We traveled down to the southern part of Israel. We visited the first kibbutz that was attacked by these terrorists. We saw homes that were burned to the ground. We saw that they have photos in this kibbutz of people who were murdered. We have photos of families. In one case, the home was almost totally destroyed. The father is still one of the hostages. Fortunately, they did release the mom and the 7-year-old son. But to see this firsthand, Senator, is one thing to watch it on the nightly news, but to see the devastation firsthand, it really changed me. And I'm so proud of the partnership that we have with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And we went there with one purpose, and that was to interview people. We had a chance, Senator, to sit down with a young lady. She's 23 years old. Her name is Noah. She's a survivor. She was at the music festival. She and her boyfriend heard the initial shots. They ran to an open field. There was one tree in the center of this field, Senator. They were able to climb into this very dense tree and somehow avoid being murdered by these terrorists. She was there for over 8 hours. She told me this. She said, Joey, before this, I wasn't sure there was a God. She took a photo of this tree, and several days later, she's talking with some of her friends, and they're talking about the tree. One of her friends said that they named the Hebrew name of the tree. I can't recall what that is, but basically the meaning is God's cover. And she said, Joey, I believe in God now. That changed my life.
Amen.
And she's telling her story all around the world now. On March 22nd, you posted on X, Hamas started and continues this conflict. Israel has every right to defend itself, and dangerous efforts to undermine its leadership must be condemned. I will always stand with our great ally as it seeks to confront and eradicate the threat of terrorism. Talk with us, Senator Scott, about Biden's response and some of your Senate colleague, the Senate Majority Leader, calling for new elections in Israel.
Joey, when you talk about, we are concerned with election interference in America. The last thing we should see is any politician, especially the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, Chuck Schumer, calling for regime change in Israel. Why in the world would you call for regime change of your ally in the middle of the war? Even Netanyahu's opposition came out clearly and said to Chuck Schumer, stay out of our elections, stay out of this situation. We are unified behind Netanyahu for the absolute destruction and elimination of Hamas. That's what you call a unified country with a single mind and one goal, to save Jewish lives by eliminating the threat. The existential threat in the Middle East today is Hamas, especially for Israel. And so calling out Chuck Schumer, who obviously saw that speech he gave green-lighted by the White House. They acknowledged that they had the information, they had the speech, and they didn't stop it. To ask for a ceasefire, this administration continues to demand ceasefires. A ceasefire, for every single one of your listeners today, a ceasefire is defined as time for Hamas to reload. That's all it is. Yeah. Who breaks the ceasefires? Hamas. Who refuses to abide by a ceasefire? Hamas. Who pays the price for that? Israel. Why would we create daylight between America and our ally Israel by siding with Hamas and giving them more time to reload their weapons and target more civilians? And that's one of the key components of the discussion. Israel has targeted Hamas soldiers. Hamas has targeted Israeli civilians. They wanted to wreak havoc in the country. They wanted to terrify civilians. They wanted to have a genocide in the state of Israel.
Yeah. Senator Scott, thank you for your support of Israel. I'm just so proud to call you my senator from South Carolina. Thank you for that. We have just a minute or so left here. Yes. Like to touch on a couple of quick things here. First off, Bidenomics. There's a meme being circulated on social media. I haven't confirmed some of the prices and all, but basically it's saying, we're paying a lot more for things now than we were prior to Joe Biden. For example, coffee, it says $6.99 a pound before Joe Biden, $8.99 now. A price of a dozen eggs is just crazy. Can you give me some hope, Senator, that we're going to be able to turn this around?
100%. Elections have consequences, number one. Number two, November the 5th is the beginning of a new era for American prosperity, American opportunity, and unifying the country. Why? Because Donald Trump is the candidate that best represents America's best future. And here's the good news. We can compare and contrast. Under Joe Biden, we've seen devastation, destruction, and people becoming delusional on the left. Under Donald Trump, we had low inflation, low unemployment, high enthusiasm, wages growing faster at the bottom than the top. Since Joe Biden has taken office, gas is up nearly 50%. Even over the last 12 months, we've seen costs for veterinarians up double digits, for gas up even more, for car insurance double digits, car repairs double digits. Here's what all that translates to. The average American does not have $1,000 in their savings account because of Joe Biden's Bidenomics. We will eliminate that with 4 more years of Donald Trump.
Wow. Yeah. One final question, Senator, and I have to ask you this.
Yes, sir.
Are we going to see Senator Tim Scott playing a role in the Trump administration? Could it be Trump Scott?
Only Donald Trump knows the answers to that question, but what I can tell you, without any question, I will do whatever it takes, Joey, to make sure that Donald Trump gets 4 more years, because that's good for the little Tim Scotts of the world. Growing up in poverty, single-parent household, asking the question, does America work for the poorest kids in the country? Whether you're a rural kid or inner-city kid, you deserve to achieve your American dream, and Donald Trump is the best option to get that done. 4 more years coming
Senator,
your way.
you are an inspiration to us all. Keep up the good fight in the United States Senate. It's always a pleasure.
God bless. Thank you so much, Joey. See you soon.
Sure thing.